Round like a circle in a spiral, like a wheel within a wheel, never ending or beginning, on an ever spinning reel, like a snowball down a mountain or a carnival balloon, like a carousel that's turning, running rings around the moon, like a clock whose hands are sweeping past the minutes of its face, and the world is like an onion whirling silently in space, like the circles that you find in the windmills of your mind. Poetry, 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 to introduce what is quite possibly the most important topic you'll ever think of. That is, of course, the theory of the mind. And to introduce it, we have none other than our special guest, Piper. So I'm going to pass it straight over to you, Piper. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. We welcomed Fabio, Hogtie, Piper, and of course Xbox. And we're just going to pass it over to Piper, I think. Why not? Why not? Piper, how are you today? And what is the topic?
Yeah, hi, thanks. I'm good. Hope you all are doing well. Yeah, so the topic is the theory of the mind or the philosophy of mind. Um, it's one of the sort of fields that comes under the broad heading of cognitive science, and that's going to include philosophy of mind, psychology, neuroscience, that kind of thing. Um, and so basically, philosophy of mind as a contemporary sort of sub-discipline within analytic philosophy deals with what the mind is, the nature of the mind. Is the mind something that's material or immaterial? Is there a distinction between mind and body? Um, what's happening when the mind represents things in the world to itself? What is the nature of beliefs and desires? Um, you know, what is the nature of experience? This kind of thing, right? That's the broad sort of field, and it goes, you know, I mean, things have only become sort of divided into sub disciplines in contemporary analytic philosophy, not so long ago, right? But philosophy of mind, goes back to ancient times. Plato was thinking about the mind, Aristotle was thinking about the mind. Descartes is early modern philosopher, probably one of the most famous early modern philosophers, was thinking about the mind, and so on and so forth. So thinking about the mind is a long-standing tradition in philosophical endeavors. So yeah.
All right, we're good to go. That wraps the show up for tonight.
Great. Thank you, everybody. I'm glad we sorted that one out because that was a real nutty problem. I don't think we have. Fabio,
No, that
over
was
to you.
beautiful, Piper. That's perfect.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Fabio, do you have a mind? If so, what is it?
A mind is a beautiful thing to waste. And
um,
I'll just leave it there for a second.
and also too, Piper had mentioned a little bit ago that also this can go into about when does a machine have a mind as well? Can a machine have a mind?
Yeah, one of the sort of big questions in the philosophy of mind in today's day and age, even going back to the 20th century with Alan Turing is, can machines have minds, right? Can machines be conscious in a similar way, to our consciousness, in a similar way to us being conscious, or even a similar way to the consciousness that we infer in animals. Also, whether animals have consciousness is a subject in philosophy of mind, or whether animals have minds, so called, right? So there's a lot of very interesting questions in this field.
Yeah, that one's. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Machine could have a mind. I'm not sure about consciousness. I mean, there's some AI which are conscious, even right now. But yeah, I think they can. If I'm not mistaken, and this is totally not my field, the theory of mind just states four basic tenets, which should be intentions, emotions, desires, and beliefs. And feel free to correct me, because again, as I said, it's way out of my league. And yeah, but I mean, I don't see too many problems in in having some kind of machine which has those four tenets. I mean, of course, there would be different from the one that we have, but even they have it. If they have a subset of them, meaning that they might have not have all the beliefs that we have, or not all the intentions that we have. I don't see too many problems about that.
My problem always with it, and it's not really a problem with that, it's my problem with it, is it's not that I don't think a machine can have a mind. It's, would we recognize the mind that it has as a mind? If are we trying to compare it to like our mind, or could it have something, maybe better, or lesser even, I guess, but could it have something better that we just don't recognize as
It's
a mind? And
I mean, I don't know about better. It's it might be different,
different would
but
be the
again,
word.
we have to. I think we have to establish, some kind of I wouldn't say standard, but some kind of characteristics that,
Yeah,
if they exist in a single entity, that is a mind.
right.
And,
Yeah, like, would self-awareness kind of be like one of the
I don't know. I'm
things?
not really sure about that.
Well, do you think that sort of non-human animals have minds? Some of them probably will have some degree of self-awareness, but it's going to be very limited, and most of them probably won't be self-aware, in the way that we take ourselves to be, right? So if you
Mm,
think those two things simultaneously, then you'll have reason to think that while self-awareness might be a sufficient condition for mentality, so if you are
mm,
self-aware that you do have a mind, it's not going to be a necessary condition, meaning you can have a mind
Right.
and not be self-aware.
right. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was I was that this is what I was trying to hint at. I'm not really sure that self awareness or self consciousness is a characteristic of a mind. I mean,
Yeah.
it would be a huge, in my opinion, it would be a huge. I mean, a massive requirement. It will cut off a lot of things that we think they have a mind,
Hmm.
and just because we cannot be sure if they are self-conscious, or we don't know if they're self-conscious, but we still think they got a mind, like,
Hmm.
as Piper said, some animals. I don't think we have too many problems in saying that they have a mind.
Right.
Self-consciousness, it's a little bit trickier, even with with more evolved animals. So I'm not really sure about self-consciousness if it's a requirement.
Well, yeah, I've thought I've never really thought about my dog having self-awareness, but I have given the thought that it does have a mind. It does deliberate. It makes decisions. Seems to have desires. So it does seem to have a mind, but I don't think I've ever sat and actually thought, does it have any kind of self-reflection or any self-awareness?
Yeah, I tend to think that that non-human animals have a sort of, they have an ability to sort of appropriate, the world around them, have experiences, make decisions on the basis of those experiences. I think some of them even have like beliefs and desires, which is where you sort of get into, why I'd be an ethical vegan, right? But, putting that stuff aside, I think the distinguishing factor between our mentality and animal, non-human animal mentality is that we have the sort of ability to critically reflect on the things that we're doing in the world, right? We can sort of ask ourselves, am I doing the right thing? What should I be doing? That kind of thing, right? And so that sort of critical self-reflectiveness is, I think what distinguishes our mentality from the mentality of the other animals.
So, but isn't that so? What do you think, Piper? Isn't that self-awareness? For lack of a better term, is it a characteristic of a highly evolved mind, or is it a characteristic that a mind must have?
I think it's the former. So I think animals don't have it, but they still have minds.
Yeah.
Our mind, because of our evolutionary sort of history, in my view, does have it, right? So it's a distinction between our mentality and the mentality of other animals.
Right. Yeah.
I think part of the difficulty is how much this concept about, whatever, self-awareness, consciousness, sapience, all these different terms we use, is unfortunately so strongly tied to the notions of language.
Versus me.
Right. And when you can communicate, like, yes, I have feelings. Yes, I'm aware of who I am. Yes, I know I understand my mortality. Right. Oh, okay. Well, clearly anything that can utter those phrases must be self-aware, must be safe. But the problem there is, I could write a 5-line program in BASIC that could mimic are you self-aware? Yes, I am. And at the same time, you could go to a dog, orangutan or chimpanzee, and ask them, are you self-aware? You're not going to get a strong answer out of them. So what do we make of that?
Yeah, that gets into. I mean, that's part of. That's been part of the.
Does language come into any of this of a mind?
Oh well, yeah. So
or
there
any
are
of the talk of.
There's
mind, philosophy of mind.
Yeah, there's there's another field of philosophy called philosophy of language. That's basically asking questions about like what language is, how should you theorize about it philosophically? What are the sort of, how should your ontology treat language and so forth, right? And that intersects with philosophy of mind a lot, right? Because, sort of prerequisites for language, are things like, you know, um, meaning and so forth. And, when you're expressing a meaning, most people are going to take that to be a sort of mental activity, right? I'm conscious of some meaning that I want to convey and so forth, right? So yeah, philosophy of language intersects with philosophy of mind in a, really important way. The things that Hogtie said about like inferring minds or self-consciousness, from the actions of other beings, right? That's a sort of, that's not only a big issue in epistemology, but it's also getting into the sort of questions that philosophers of mind ask about machine consciousness, right? So there's this question about how do we tell, if we concede that machines can be conscious, how would we be able to tell, right, that a machine is conscious, in a similar way to us, let's say, right? And that was the point of the Turing test that was developed by Alan Turing in the 20th century. The idea was basically that, I won't describe the whole thing, but I'll just say that, like, the idea was, if a machine could fool you, right, into thinking, or at least fool, people at a high rate, right, into thinking that it was another person, right, then you should consider it conscious. And so then there's this concern about, like, well, isn't that like a anthropocentric idea of consciousness, right? Where we're sort of counting it as conscious because, or counting it as having a mind because it sort of does things in a similar way that we do, such that we would think that it's one of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
And,
more like a synthetic, more like a synthetic mind, just a response bot kind of thing, or is it actually have a mind and tricking you? Or I guess it wouldn't be tricking you at that point.
Well, there was a certain amount of...
Go ahead, sorry.
Well, just on the sort of reinterpretation, like looking back on it, and I'm glad you mentioned Piper. Glad you mentioned the Turing test. It crossed my mind when Xbox and Fabio had that exchange a moment ago about consciousness, or could machines be conscious? Because that was kind of the test at the time. And I think, well, most people are familiar with the Turing test. It's so brief to explain. I mean, basically, you've got a person sitting there at a computer that's text chatting with something else on the other side of a wall. It might be a person. It might be a computer that's running code to simulate a person. And the challenge was, are you talking with a person? Are you talking with a sentient machine? But I really don't believe that anybody in those studies would think like, they're really being challenged by the notion of, am I talking to a sentient machine or just a clunker of a machine? What they were doing was they were asking themselves, am I talking to a human? Right? Like that's why when Piper said, like, it's so anthropocentric, because that the options are, you're either talking with a human or you're talking with a machine that's pretending to be a human. There might be types of consciousness and types of self-awareness that aren't familiar to us as human consciousness is, whereas the Turing test was really a test about recognizing human consciousness, not machine consciousness.
Yeah,
right.
That's and there's also, I agree with what Oktay said. I think it's a crucial point. But having said that, it's not even that important anymore, because we currently have AIs which have passed the Turing test. There's more than one. There is one which is called, has a funny name. So there is one which is called Cassandra, which claims to be self-aware, and it's on the internet. You can request a demo. You put your email and you can request a demo. There is another one which I think is called Eugene Guzman or Gosman or something like that, which is supposed to be like a 13-year-old Ukrainian boy, which has passed the Turing test. But again, I don't think that passing the Turing test right now it's really that crucial. It was a thought experiment which was really brilliant in the 50s when it was developed, but I think that we are past that thing right now, and what Oktay and Piper said, just show that there might be some different levels of intelligence, of self-awareness, which doesn't necessarily imply that you've got to mimic the human mind or the human brain, to define that as being a proper self-consciousness mind. And again, I want to stress out the fact that I'm not super convinced that, so if we're talking strictly about the theory mind, I'm not super convinced that, self-consciousness is a requirement for a mind.
Right. Yeah. No, you said exactly what I was trying to ask a minute ago about the consciousness part, because we've gotten to it, like you said, on the Turing test, we pass it, but we kind of realized that that's not enough. That you can fool the Turing test in kind of ways, and I think people knew that before we got hit to this point.
Well, that is not exactly what I was saying. I mean, you
No,
talk
I was
about,
adding.
no,
I was adding.
because well, you talk about fooling the Turing test. The two examples that I made, they're not fooling the Turing test. They pass the Turing test. It's different,
Yeah, no, I'm
what
not talking
Oktay
about
said,
those.
I can write a program really simple, which is not AI or nothing, which in theory can fool the Turing test. That
Right.
is not AI, that is not a mind, that is nothing. It's just something which is designed to fool the Turing test.
Right. That was my point. I was adding. I wasn't trying to discredit what you said. I agree with what you said. We do
I
have
just
some AI that get to the Turing test, and I think we've kind of realized that you can make a bot to fool the Turing test. So maybe we need to tweak the tests that are going on to establish whether something has a mind or not.
Well, if I can illustrate like how I guess to go in the wrong direction here, I've heard the argument that a really good indicator of self-awareness is whether or not you take steps towards self-preservation, right? And what this means is, so if I go to my lawnmower and I kick one of the tires on, heck, I could actually kick it so hard I break the hub off and the tire's broken right off. Lawnmower doesn't care. Lawnmower doesn't understand what it would mean to care about itself and its self-preservation. But if I kick a person in the leg, they're going to tell me, stop it, right? They're going, or they might actually do something to attack me. They're going to take steps to self-preservation. Obviously, it's because a human is self-aware and understands I have a responsibility to protect my existence. I have a responsibility to persist. By the way, if you step on your cat's tail or step on your dog's paw, they will communicate very quickly, very effectively that you're doing something that they don't like. By the way, I was driving home today, and my vehicle put up an alert saying it was low on fuel. Vehicles will tell you when they have stressing circumstances, like you're low on fuel, or the oil pressure is low, or a tire pressure is low. So the vehicle will protest and will do things to self-preserve.
Yeah.
Well, okay, wait a minute. So my vehicle is self-aware, but my lawnmower isn't. So the notion of like self-preservation, even that, I don't think is. Your Windows computer will tell you when you're running low on hard drive space. You know what I mean?
No.
Right.
You're totally right. I mean, when you were talking, I was thinking about there are some plants which actually, react, to the danger. But I think that your example with the car is way more on point, and you're right. Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to point out a couple of things. Firstly, there's a link for the Cassandra, which you were talking about, in the chat, and that'll be down in the description as well. Please go and check that out.
Perfect.
And also, just to say, this is familiar to me in another way, which is people say about, they give it comes from a theistic argument, right? The mind is not designed for truth, it's designed for survival. Right? It's evolved, in my words, obviously, to be. It's evolved to care about survival, not to care about what the truth is. So, what is that? Where you're going with this, Hogtie?
No, I wasn't so much going. Well, I guess kind of in a way. I'm sort of reacting to a point that no one in this room made, but I've heard put forward as a good test for self-awareness, is that only a self-aware thing would vocalize or would concern itself with self-preservation. Only a thing that is self-aware would, quote unquote, care about its own persistence. But the fact of the matter is, there's any number of computers, including every computer produced in a vehicle after about 2004. These computers will tell you when they're, concerned about a problem with their state. And maybe I didn't say it explicitly, I kind of left it implied. When I step on my cat's tail and my cat's tail offers up that protestation, is it just running software? Is it just like, oh, you push this button and therefore, it makes this sound the same way that my vehicle does? Or is it thinking through its own existence and understanding that I exist, I am in circumstances I don't like, the big human stepped on my tail, I'd prefer that doesn't happen, so I'm going to make this sound. I just don't think it's a good test. The whole idea about something expressing a concern about its own state is somehow a good or complete test for consciousness or
something. Well, that's why I brought up the example here of evolution, because in some sense, right, a fully working human would be concerned, right, in those circumstances, where a car, of course, would be describing the truthful situation that it was running out of fuel, for instance. Whereas it's not necessarily the case for a human, right, that it is actually a harmful thing, right? We take pain, right, for the greater good sometimes, whereas a car is not going to do that. So there is still a distinction to be made there between machines and consciousness, I feel.
Yeah,
I'm not sure I understood your point, Simos. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Trying to elucidate it. Yeah. Okay. Well, just to say that sometimes the pain, right? Because it's a pain response. What Hogtie's talking about. Sometimes we take the pain because it's for the better, right? An operation or something like that. So it's not necessarily, there's more to it than just we are, against pain. It's not that simple, is it? Whereas for a car, it doesn't register the pain, but it does register running out of gas and possibly failing.
Yeah, but I think that Hogtie was talking about specifically about one aspect of self-awareness, which he doesn't even agree with, and I agree with him. That is, self-preservation. And I think that the example he made is actually on point.
Well, that's why
what I mean is that I think that self-preservation is not a good indicator of self-awareness. That would be, my rebuttal.
Yeah, I have an example of that, and I had 2 points. I can't remember what the other point was, but there is an experiment that they did with worms, where they poked them with sticks, right, and hurt them, and they reacted to it. They cut the worms in half. The worms regrew the tails or whatever back, and they came back with the stick to poke it. And as they did, the worms reacted to the stick and jerked away from it rather than let it be poked again. But I don't think anyone's going to say that worm had a mind or was conscious. The same way that Hogtie was describing stepping on the cat's tail and the cat reacting in that same way. So I would agree that that's not a good test. That there's got to be something a little more there than that kind of a test.
That's kind of the point I was trying to get at, I guess, which is to say that just a simple response, right, if you like, or a reaction is not necessarily going to dictate that, because there are cases where consciousness takes that reaction, puts it into context, right, and then it becomes, it can become either way, good or bad, right, or useful or not useful, if you like. Yeah. Whereas cars can't do that, plants don't do that. In fact, it's only consciousness that is able, it seems, to take a particular reaction, put it into context, and then find, that it is, like the example of an operation, the pain that you get from somebody breaking your leg or something like that, perhaps, or your ribs, for instance, could be put into a context which, in fact, is beneficial for the organism as a whole.
Yeah, that actually you reminded me of the second point that I wanted to make. The second point was that at least with humans, I haven't really ever thought about it with other animals, and this may apply to other animals that we would say have minds or some level of consciousness. But we, as natural beings, I guess I'll call us, we tend to make errors sometimes in our judgment. And I'm not sure a machine with that we would say has a consciousness like that is going to make errors in that same way. So it's going to be a different kind of recognition between.
Okay, let's try.
Did that make sense?
Let's try to switch gears here.
Yeah.
Because I think we all agree that the thing that Altai described is spot on. Okay, so I think that we all agree that is not sufficient at all. So I'm trying to switch gear and just present you something. See if you guys can agree a little bit more on that. I would define self-awareness as the ability to decide or to focus or just to think about that if your actions and emotions they adhere to your internal standards.
Would you say that one more time?
Yeah, so I would define self-awareness as the capacity of questioning your own actions or emotions or thoughts or inactions, which I guess they're actions, and to question them to see if they're consistent, they adhere to your own internal standards.
I strongly agree with Fabio on that.
There you go. I got one. Okay. And you know what? I'm gonna celebrate with another sip of vodka. Carry on.
Sorry, I lagged out as you were talking. But were you meaning like contemplation, like thinking about thinking, or things like that?
Well then, first off, we all know that Fabio is drinking grappa. Let's not pretend it's vodka.
No, it's vodka actually. So
well, la di da.
There you go.
Nice.
The one Italian who can afford something better than grappa. Good for you.
Did you hear my question, Fabio?
Yeah, but
okay. I keep lagging out, so it just wasn't sure.
No. I'm not going that deep, because I feel the question, the way you pose, is kind of a rabbit hole that I'm not even going there. I will just say that so if you have an entity, whatever, right? Because we're not constrained to humans or whatever, that has the ability to question their own actions or thoughts or emotions or inactions, to question them, to see if they adhere to their own standards, the standards of the entity. That I would define as self-awareness.
No, see that's what I would call like contemplation. But I think we're agreeing. I think it's just using a different word.
Okay, yeah.
It is kind of that, and that's kind of why I was throwing in the errors that we make in our judgment, where I don't think a machine is gonna. At least we're not gonna build it to try to make errors. We're gonna build it to try to avoid to make errors in judgment. or
No, no,
errors
no,
in.
no, 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 not at all. I mean, it's not a problem of making errors or not, right? I mean, self-awareness, it does. I mean, so according to what I said before, it has
Mhm.
nothing to do with errors or mistakes. It's also things that you actually agree with. You know, it's just that you think about before doing that. It's not necessarily an error. You know what I mean?
No. I was saying it just like if it could have an error, not that it just does errors but down the road it could have an error, or it could
Yeah.
like that's how we do anyway. Like not all my judgments are bad. Like I don't drink vodka all night, and I wish it.
It's a loss.
But like we do that, and that's why I said I'm not sure if other animals do that, but I'm not sure we would want a machine that we designed to do that, but maybe a machine designed with a mind or consciousness might develop that on its own. Like it may be faced with
You can actually
situations
code
where
an AI which
Mhm.
fits that description. You can
Yeah, and
actually do that.
that seems more like a but I'm seeing a bias kind of come out from myself
Yeah,
when I say that, right?
yeah.
Like a human bias or something.
No, it seems to me that you're trying to, and I mean no disrespect to your Xbox, but it seems to me that you're trying to um, how can I say you have a very, in my opinion, you have a very poetic vision of the mind as something that there might be something a little bit mysterious about it. I don't want to say soul, right? Okay, so I'm not
Sure,
saying
sure.
soul, but it seems to me that you're stuck a little bit into that kind of conception. Well,
Oh yeah,
just maybe, I'm on the opposite side. I see it's a little bit too mechanic or whatever, which I don't think I do, and I don't think you do, but I'm just trying
hmm
to make our position way more extreme than what they are. So, and I think
yeah. No, I
that
think
your
you're on
difficulty
point.
in this kind of line of conversation is because you're kind of struggling with the concept that you can actually build something which uh, which has the characteristic of a mind, is self-consciousness and all that shit. You know what I mean. So yeah, and
Yeah.
again,
Well,
and
no. You're on point. I'm thinking of things like competing desires. Like if we have something that it has competing desires, and it picks um, maybe say the more harmful desire on that it whatever it picks ends up being the more harmful desire, or things like that are just an
it's
accidental.
it's it's not necessarily an harmful desire. When I say internal standards, so let's say, for example, that you're a psychopath, or a sociopath. Your internal desire is to act according to whatever you are. You're a fucking sociopath, right? So
Right.
that would be a self-aware sociopath or a psychopath. You
hmm
don't say somebody's crazy and say, well, no, okay. I mean, you don't say like a full-fledged psychopath that you wouldn't tell that he's not self-aware. Maybe he's too much self-aware, in his own standards. He just doesn't give a flying fuck. His standards are not the
Okay.
same as the majority of the people. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. You're on point with that. I agree. I mean,
So we
most
solved that
people
problem.
know why. I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah. Yeah. We can move to like something like the mind body. Like if anybody
Yeah, I
has
mean,
any questions or ideas about if the mind is something separate, or if it's
yeah,
the brain and the mind are the same thing.
yeah. So, you guys, I think we're starting to wade in that a little bit a few minutes ago. So there's like one of the main questions in the philosophy of mind is whether there's a distinction between mind and body, and that ultimately gets into like theories about what the mind ultimately is, what kind of thing it is. Um, and so whether there's a division between mind and body can be answered various different ways, right? One way you can answer it is by saying that there is no division, and that can be held by a kind of suite of different people who have different positions on what the mind is, right? So materialists obviously will say that there's no division between mind and body because mind just is body, right? There's no distinction between them, right? And the world is um basically I mean usually that gets attached to this larger metaphysical thesis about the world being fundamentally material, although there are like Christian philosophers who also think there's no distinction between mind and body, so there are like Christian physicalists about the mind. And you can also say there's no distinction between mind and body if you're an idealist, a metaphysical idealist. If you think that everything is mental, right, then there's not going to be any distinction between the mind and the body because the body is going to be just as mental as the mind is, right? Everything is the mind on that view. So you can, I believe you could also say that there's not really a distinction between mind and body if you're what's called a neutral or Russellian monist. Those guys think that like, the world isn't mental or physical. It's something else. It's some third thing at a fundamental level. Um and mental and physical things are going to be kind of derivative on that kind of third category, I suppose. um so if you answer that the mind and body are separate, you can either be a substance dualist or a property dualist. Substance dualists think that there's two fundamentally different kinds of things, minds and bodies, right? And minds will kind of be attached to bodies or operate through bodies, and then maybe after death the mind separates from the body. So people who believe in souls, that's kind of that's basically substance dualism, right? Property dualism is the idea that mind and body are distinct, right? um and at the very least they're distinct because the mind is a sort of different kind of property from physical properties, right? So you have physical properties on the one hand and mental properties on the other. So it's not saying they're fundamentally different things, right? It's saying they're different kinds of properties, right? So those are that's the kind of outline of positions on the mind body problem you can sort of have.
I don't know, the mind body problem.
Anybody have any thoughts on where they land on that spectrum?
Well, that's where I was going to go. It is working. Yeah, I find that it's funny because certainly the mind body problem. The mind body problem is absolutely at the center of this philosophy of mind, and yet it's funny because I think perhaps at my age or whatever, I find it an uninteresting issue because I've made up my mind. I don't even know how to debate that anymore. In my view, it is clear that whatever we mean by the word mind, and that's an interesting question. What do we mean by mind? What do we mean by consciousness? What do we mean by sapience or sentience, right? Whatever we mean by those terms, it's perfectly obvious to me that those things are grounded in the organization of neurons and interconnections amongst neurons. And the idea that there's somehow some other material or fluid that is our soul. I mean, I guess I like that. Probably the best wording of it I've heard. It's a fairly famous quotation from Sam Harris, where he was in a debate, and he observed about how well the functioning of the quote unquote mind, how well it tracks with the physical state of the brain. As you go forward, get older, as you get more and more brain damage, the functioning of the mind, goes downhill. And yet we're led to believe, as Sam Harris puts it, and yet we're led to believe that at the moment of death, when the brain completely fails, that the full mind just lifts off the brain wholly intact as it had been 20 years before. To me, that doesn't make sense. There's no evidence for it. So I just think I've just gotten to the point where I'm like, yeah, whatever we mean by mind, that's just how the brain works. And there's just nothing other than the physical brain.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things to say there. One of them is that we sort of have to be careful when we're marshaling the sort of neuroscientific evidence, right, for justifying our theories of mind, right? Because all of the different theories you could have, even substance dualism, are going to be compatible with the neuroscientific evidence. In fact, contemporary substance dualists in analytic philosophy tell this story about how, there's some, necessary connections between the immaterial mind and the material body, right? And so the neural correlates that we, have discovered, neural correlates to mental activity, can be explained, that way, rather than just saying that, the neural correlates are the mental activity, right? So, pretty much any theory of mind can explain that stuff. But what you are kind of hinging or pushing up upon is that historically, at least for contemporary, as far as contemporary materialism goes, which is basically after something called behaviorism was really popular, and people didn't want to think about the mind as something internal going on inside you. They wanted to think of it as like how you react to things sort of exclusively. But once that sort of fell by the wayside and people started thinking about the internal workings of the mind again, the sort of materialism that became popular was one that was based on the sort of success of the physical sciences in describing everything about the world, such that, many of these philosophers, thought it would be a sort of miracle, right? If something as seemingly important to the universe as minds, right, turned out to be something fundamentally distinct from the things that physics studies, right? And so from then on, you get materialist theories of the mind that try to understand the mind in terms of the internal sort of workings of the brain and biology, rather than as something separate from that, because they were they had the motivation to develop a view like that because of the success of physics and biophysics and so on and so forth. The other interesting thing to say about that is that those views that were developed, after the death of behaviorism, there's been a sort of succession of different ways that materialists have thought about the mind, right? So one sort of way that, so the sort of initial way that people wanted to think about it was something called identity theory, which said that the mind, mental states just are identical to states of the body, right? There's an identity there. And because of really complicated considerations about, something called multiple realizability, that then gave way to materialist theory of the mind, which is currently most popular now, called functionalism, right? Which is the idea that the mind can sort of be understood as the sort of causal mechanisms that are going on in the brain or the body, right? Um, and there are even different types of the earlier mentioned identity theory. So there's type and token identity theory, and that's a big, thing that we can get into. I don't want to go on too much of a ramble about it, but the point is that there's also, even if we sort of presume that materialism is the correct way of thinking about things, there is a question about which materialist theory do you want to go for, so.
Right. I think, well, coming back to something we kind of touched on earlier, which is
Right.
what do we
If you go
mean
with the
by mind
materialism, you've
itself?
still got a plethora of views that you've got to kind of sift through to see where you are.
Yeah. So what do we mean by the mind?
I think
is
I
it me?
told
Is
you
it me?
just the other day, Piper. I'm
I think
just from
Xbox is
an
lagging
experience. Sorry.
No problem, Xbox. Go ahead.
Is this any better?
Yeah. Yep. You're good. You're good.
Although it's unclear to me whether you mean Xbox's connection is laggy or Xbox's mind is
I
laggy.
think there's like a delay on
We've
his end.
suspected.
I think there's quite a delay. Yeah. Maybe it's between the hand and the mind, or maybe it's between the computer and the connection. I don't know. Go ahead, Xbox. What were you saying? Are you there?
He said he'll weigh in just a minute. You can,
Okay.
yeah, Simos,
No
you can
problem.
go on with what you were saying.
Yeah. Okay. So no, I was just thinking more in terms of like, are we trying to describe a mind with respect to what a human is, or are we just going to describe a mind as opposed to what we wish it was, right? I.e., some kind of idealistic idealism sense of what the mind is, right? And it seems to me that there's quite a lot of overlap there. Go ahead.
Let me jump on that real quick, because there's something when we ponder what we mean by a mind, we are so anthropocentric. Not only because the entities that are pondering what we mean by mind all happen to be human, all of those people are only familiar with human sapience and human communication. It reminds me a lot about those discussions about what we mean by life, right? So, for example, life has DNA. Well, if we try to come down with a pared down definition of what we mean by life, DNA isn't an essential part of it, even though every example we have is DNA based. I guess that's where there's our, whatever, you know what I mean? But like, I do think there's an issue with and I said that earlier when we talked about the Turing test. This is something, obviously it's the second time I brought it up, or actually I'm responding to what Simos said, but it's something that greatly concerns me. When we try to pare down a definition of what we mean by mind, we always seem to end up with the concept of human mind and how animals or computers might approximate or simulate the human mind. I don't know what the solution to that is, but it's a concern.
Well, that's hogtie where I was going with it, because of this matter of survival or truth. Right? The mind, as often said, is not a tool designed for truth. It's a tool designed for survival. Because we make these type 2 errors, etc., etc., we have to make type 2 errors in order to survive. So we've evolved to make those errors, and that's a common problem that we run into when we infer other types of logic, or we use the logic in other ways, which we think we're trying to derive truth from, but in fact we're just making another set of errors and fallacies, because we're not necessarily rational. I hate to bring that word in there, but I think that is the word to use, right? So we would wish that a mind was rational and completely rational, the Spock kind of ideal, if you like, although maybe not Spock, maybe Data. But of course, we're left with the reality that our minds are not necessarily rational. In fact, they're deliberately evolved to be irrational in particular ways that might aid survival. Does that make sense? I was aiming this at you, Octai.
I was at a, yeah, no, actually, it's funny. I was impressed by that. What a great way to put it about how, the mind is designed, designed, quote unquote, by evolutionary processes to be rational. And but, in general, but at the same time, it's designed to be irrational, but not in random ways. It's designed to be irrational in ways that favor survival. I love the way you put it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I mean, that's the issue with when we describe mind. We have this ideal of complete rationality, as if that's something that is going to lead us to information and truth, right? And it's not necessarily the case, because the way we get to truth is not through deductive arguments when we're trying to find out something necessarily, something which is unknown. Then we don't approach it through a deductive argument. We approach it through an inductive argument, which doesn't necessarily lead to the concept of absolute truth. And I think that's the dilemma that we have when we try to describe what we wish a mind to be and the reality of what a mind is. Yeah, anyway. I don't know if that answers anything or just throws another spanner in the works. Oh.
Have I cut back up?
Yep, you're there. I hear you.
Okay, there we go. I hope. My computer is overheating for some reason. But yeah, that's you put it in a great way. There's the kind of errors that I was trying to get across earlier that I think are built into mind. I think I was talking to Piper the other day, or at least she might have been in the room with us, that I had an experience a while back, and it's got me to start thinking about dualism and thinking of the mind being something separate. And I at least want to explore that.
Yeah, it's a dangerous path. I'll just say that. Okay. It seems to me that
Could be.
yeah, I mean, how would you prove? I don't think there's any way to prove something like this, because again, like Otto's saying, these definitions are so flexible. What do we mean by X, Y, Z? If we're just, we're going to be begging the question if we say we're looking for a mind to be described as what a human has, and that's just begging the question of, I think, of naturalism in some respects, and falsifying dualism, because there's no inductive proof that we can give for like some other kind of substance that we don't know about, right? I mean, that seems to be the complication.
You always hear people if they're talking that way, is that the brain is just a interpretation machine or a encoder decoder machine. You can damage it, but the mind is still there, and it's just having to work through a damaged, decoder.
You're right. Yeah, but again,
that's what you'll hear of people. I'm not claiming that, but that's what you'll hear.
Right. It seems to me, again, that's another begging the question fallacy against a properly working mind being defined as something other than what is human. Right? Because a human mind properly working makes these type 2 errors, or whatever you want to call them. Right? It does make errors in order to, accept falsities in order to survive. Right? Whereas if we're talking about minds operating, functionally at least, then they're not going to be like necessarily focused on truth, although there is a strong correlation. So I just think the question itself isn't resolvable until you resolve what you're trying to do, what you're trying to describe. And when we say things like computers, right? Can computers have consciousness? Right? That seems to me almost a meaningless question, right? Because you know, I mean, why would you program a computer to accept something false unless you wanted to limit its potential powers? Thank you, Fabio, for coming on. Much appreciated.
Yeah. Sorry, guys, but it's getting really late. So thank you for having me, and not good
Well, thank
conversation.
you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Absolutely.
Ciao.
You have a
So
good night.
thank you. So that's the question I want to really get people to answer, if possible. When we're trying to talk about computers becoming conscious or having minds, okay, are we saying that they have to be, you know, something ultimately always rational, right? Yeah, I think
Right.
that's the
Yeah.
question.
That's I say you hit the nail on the head. Like the way you put it. The hog dive backed you up on that. That's kind of what I was trying to point out when about having errors. Does it is a machine? Are we only going to recognize a mind in a machine if it has these same type of errors, or is it going to be like ASI? Like, is it going to be like a better version that doesn't do these errors, and will that make it harder to recognize as a mind or consciousness if it doesn't have the errors?
Right. Yeah, and again, just to say this, Piper, I think that this is connected to the point about dualism, right? And saying, look, if there's this other substance, is that not just trying to say that you can have a mind which doesn't have these, it doesn't make these particular errors that are necessary for survival?
I mean, yeah, I think the point is that the mind isn't sort of limited to the corporeal world. It could possibly exist, sans the corporeal world, sans nature or whatever.
Right. So logically possible, yes, I agree. But what are you saying when you say that it could be sans the material world? What kind of mind are you talking about then? Why would you posit that as a possible explanation other than it's logically possible?
Yeah, so the arguments for that, I mean, so what a famous argument for that Descartes used and that's still in circulation in the literature is something called the conceivability argument, and it relies on something called the conceivability possibility principle, which is that if you can clearly, sort of with all the relevant information, imagine that something could be the case, then that means, or that gives you reason to think that it really could be the case. And so then you get sort of thought experiments like, you can sort of imagine yourself, you can sort of imagine looking down on yourself while you're sitting in a chair reading, and then your body gets annihilated, it disappears, it, dematerializes, whatever, and now you're just looking down at an empty chair. Well, that seems to be, conceiving of your mind as something separate from your body, right? As existing separately from your body. And so the idea is, since you can conceive, right, that your mind is separate from your body, right? It essentially, that gives you reason to think that it is, right? That's, probably the most famous argument for substance dualism.
Yeah, I don't see how that actually follows, of course, because there's no. I mean, maybe I'm begging the question when I say that there's no mechanism to describe that could be the case, right? We have no expectation that should be the case, do we?
Yeah, I mean, so Mechanism is sort of one thing. Like, if we're talking about, let's say, nomological possibility, like physical possibility, mechanisms will be important there. We want to describe how things work according to, how material objects behave according to laws of physics and things like that, right? But when it comes to this, like, sort of metaphysical possibility stuff, all we're really trying to say is that, there is, something that could be the case in the real world, right? And so the mechanism might not be as important in that context, right?
Yeah, but isn't there like a whole host of coulds there? I mean, could seems to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting right there. To think that or at least if it's doing heavy lifting, to give us the thought that we should think that there's something there.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this relies on a conceivability possibility principle that I described before.
Right.
And you could reject that.
Sorry,
right?
that's modal logic, is it? Is that the S5 thing?
No. This is like different. This is
Okay.
actually not like a strictly like logical point. This is like a point about metaphysics. What you should allow in your ontology, right? The kinds of
Right.
possibilities you should allow in your ontology, and you can reject conceivability possibility principles. And I could see
Yeah.
why people would be motivated to. So
Well, and motivation would go both ways, then, wouldn't it? Really, on that, I can see why people might be motivated to accept it, right? But the
Yeah.
problem is, right, there doesn't seem to be a lot of inductive, like arguments for it. At best, there's a metaphysical argument, but then we're talking about something unknown. So wouldn't it fall foul to an infinite regress of justification in order to show that there is a necessary conclusion that leads to that?
Well, you could launch an objection to it, which is that, well, look, all anybody, is doing here is they're just sitting and they're introspecting and doing thought experiments, right? They're not actually going out into the world and sort of discovering what is the case, right? And, we have reason to think that conclusions that we come to when we go out and try to study the world, right, are more warranted, than conclusions that, we come to just sitting around and thinking about things, right? So you might sort of launch an objection to it from some kind of empiricism or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so, I think. And that's kind of what I mean by, the track record of trying to do metaphysical analysis of things which are claimed to be, what's the word? What's the word I'm looking for? Some real feature, right? Some feature of the external world, which presumably we are talking when we're talking about some kind of substance dualism, right? We're talking about it having some other new substance which we haven't discovered, and I fully grant the possibility or logical possibility, but that has a very poor track record, doesn't it? Oh, does it not? I mean, I could be wrong.
I mean, I sort of tend to value actually going out and investigating the world more in my epistemology than sitting around and thinking about things. Although I don't know that I wouldn't call myself an empiricist personally, but on that point, I'd probably agree with empiricists.
Right. Even in the sense of, like we talked like last time, even in the sense of Quine, you wouldn't call yourself an empiricist in that.
Yeah,
way.
I have disagreements with Quine.
Okay, interesting. I'd like to talk to you about those at some point for sure.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, when you're talking about these points, then you're saying metaphysical. What did you call the conceivability argument?
So it's the conceivability argument, and it relies on something called the conceivability possibility principle.
Right. Okay. So if you can conceive of something, it means it's possible.
Yeah, basically.
Right.
Which is, I think uncontroversial. The problem is the next step, isn't it? Saying if something is possible, then it's actual, right? That's the
Mhm.
Yeah, there's a
jump.
sort of another controversial premise you have to have there to make the argument follow, which is that you know, I mean, well, this might not actually be so controversial, but there's another sort of premise you have to add in there, which is that if right, it's possible for X to exist without Y, then X can't be identified with Y, right? Because if X is identified with Y,
Yeah,
then X can't exist without Y. So
yeah.
that's the other heavy lifting sort of
Do you
premise.
mean identify or do you mean contingent on?
Well, here it sort of means it. Here it strictly means like identical, but I think it could also work for like if you're talking about X being dependent on Y,
Yeah,
I think it
right.
could
Yeah,
work for
yeah.
either.
Okay, okay. Okay. Well, you give me some stuff to think about there. That's for sure. Xbox.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say that it does kind of throw a wrench, the dualism part, and if you build a AI and you're wanting to say it's conscious or has a mind, if you think that the mind is something separate than the brain, and you know what I mean, that with AI it'd be some kind of electronic or brain or programmed brain, but the if it had a mind or you're wanting to say it had a mind and recognize it as a mind, it seems you would have to say that's something beyond the programming or beyond the hardware. And I'm not sure how you would actually do that.
Yeah, that's all
If you
hinting.
took that view, AI or whatever or machine would never have a actual mind or consciousness that would be recognizable. Like you'd have to seems like you would have to deny that it could ever have a mind.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I think you would have to, if we granted that argument, which is a huge stretch for me, and I think a huge stretch for several other people here, but if we tried to grant that argument, that would forever put it beyond. It would forever put it beyond the ken of being able to discover it through an inductive process, and that was simply my point. In which case, are we ever going to be able to make a deductive argument which necessarily proves it? Probably not, because it's an unknown, right? And we would fall foul then of saying how are we going to justify any premises that lead to the conclusion? I have no idea how you could do that through pure deduction, and that seems to me one of the issues with saying things like, if something is possible, just because it has whatever identity is in this case, because I'm not even sure I know what that means. That's the bit I'm going to have to think about. Because it has identity, that seems to be just a metaphysical made-up way of saying whatever it is really exists because it really exists. So that seems circular to me. Hogtie, you were saying that you're not that interested in as you get older, you're not that interested in the conversation about whether mind has is an extra substance or not. Have you heard of the conceivability argument before? And if so, do you just discount it on the same way I do by being a naturalist, I guess? Okay.
If you're still there, okay.
Yeah, I think it takes a while to process. Perhaps Hogtie is an AI, and we've just blown the circuit. I don't know. It's possible. It's possible. It's conceivable. Let's put it that way. Mind.
We could always go back to everything's just in my mind, and my mind is the only mind that exists. And
oh, thank you. Yes, yeah, that's conceivable as well. I mean, this is the problem. This is why I don't understand this metaphysical malarkey, Piper, I've got to say. And that's my bias,
Right, and
admittedly.
and I'm only like I said about the dualism is because of an experience. All right, like sound like a theist at this point. Like I had an experience I can't deny, and it makes me want to look into it. But at the moment, I don't think that the mind is something other. But I mean, there are people that do, and there's arguments for it, and
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to look into it.
Yeah, and what confuses me is a lot of very, very smart people think that it is possible.
Right.
They may not be definitive on it, but they do have this idea of taking the conceivability argument to possibility, at least, right? And as far as I understand it, the topic, that the next step on is it doesn't have a good metaphysical argument for it. So to take it that one step further is too far. But just taking it from conceivability to possibility is enough to say that you should be agnostic, and that seems to me the majority view from what I can gather in philosophy and those types of argument.
Theist will make that argument of the of about using possible world semantics like that.
Yeah.
And they'll say, if you can conceive of God in any world, then he exists in all worlds. And that means that this is I can't remember how they get there, but it's...
No, and this is a world, therefore it exists in this world, yeah.
And this world is the only world. And he exists in this world. And it comes from, I think, the same, at least roots of the conceivability argument, because if you can conceive of God, then God exists in those worlds. He exists in those worlds, and it's this world, so he must exist.
Yeah, it's slightly different. I think it's slightly different there because there is a. Like I was trying to get to ask Piper, and he said no, it's not exactly the same as that. And I think that argument obviously relies on a maximal being, the properties of a maximal being existence, right? So that's one of the things, and
I think
it must exist in all worlds. Yeah, therefore it exists in this world.
I think it just has similar roots about conceivability.
No, I'd agree. I drew that conclusion straight away, and kind of went, "Oh, you mean this modal logic thing?" But apparently not. There's another argument there which I'm going to have to go and look into. I wish Jack would turn up now, because it's the perfect time for him to explain that to us. But there you go.
Actually, I put people are telling me to put the link in the chat on Clubhouse.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but I have to type it out.
Do you reference the necessity of referencing the necessity of your minds or facts? I would answer that, Lucky, but I have no idea what you're talking about.
He's making fun of Darth Dawkins. Because Darth Dawkins does this thing where he asks people, do you reference the necessity of referencing the necessity of God or whatever?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that one. I think Nerdy says it good here. If I can conceive of both a God and a non-God world, how do I know which one wins? I think that is one of the counter arguments to this maximal being existing. I think, yeah. But again, now you're back, Piper. That's a different. Yeah, now you're back, Piper. That's a different argument you were saying to the one which about dualism. Yeah.
Yeah, the modal ontological argument relies on something different.
Yeah, it does. Okay. Do you want to expound upon that at all?
Well, the modal ontological argument relies on this inference that's valid in S5 modal logic, which is that if possibly if P is possibly necessary, then P is necessary, right?
Yeah.
So, and so the idea is if it's possible that there's a necessary being, then there is a necessary being, and the necessary being is being conceived there as like God or whatever. There's a way to write it out in just regular standard form deduction, which is, you have there is a maximally great being in at least one possible world. This being is necessarily maximally excellent in all possible worlds. Therefore, this being is maximally excellent in the actual world. Something like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And again, that's this what Nerdy Rodent says. If I can conceive of both a god and a non-god world, how do I know which one wins? That's a good refutation, would you say? Or at least a reason
yeah,
to
I
not
mean, I
believe
think
it's
what's
true.
being done there is like you're challenging the idea that it's possible that there's a necessary being, or that there is such a being at least one possible world. That's probably the way I would challenge it. You know, especially since the S5 inference basically, makes necessary and possible, necessary and possibly necessary, basically semantically equivalent, right? So,
Yeah, I mean, I've heard some philosophers say something like they're not even sure that modal properties are worth considering in these situations anyway. And actually, modal logic itself is somewhat suspect in terms of the properties.
yeah, I mean, modal logic is going to be what's called like a non-classical logic. So it's going to be different from the sort of classical standard logic that was worked out by Frege and Russell.
Yeah.
So yeah, and there are some people that reject S5 specifically, but it is actually like majority of philosophers do accept it. I don't think you have to reject it to reject the modal ontological argument. I think you can just deny the premise that God is possibly necessary, or there is possibly a necessary being. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, because like it also goes for, and the way I heard about it, this originally was to do with like Aristotle's potential and actualizing and potential. I've forgotten how he put it exactly, right? So
yeah,
things
there's
being
like
potential turning to actual, and therefore there
yeah,
must be an unactualized actualizer at the beginning of it, or
yeah.
something like that. Because two things: because infinite regress is impossible, and B, these properties, these potential properties, seem to really exist.
Yeah, that's basically another argument that you find in Aristotle and in Muslim philosophers and in Aquinas, which is like
Aquinas,
a
yeah,
contingency argument that also deals with possibility and necessity.
yeah,
Specifically specifically contingency and necessity, right?
yeah,
So, yeah.
absolutely. So, I mean, these are all quite closely connected, though, aren't they, in some sense, because they're using the same principle of discounting a infinite regress. Right, potentially there could be an infinite regress of possible worlds, in which case you can't actually make any deductions from possible to probable or necessary. There can be no connection under those circumstances.
Yeah, like contingency arguments are going to require that you sort of reject the idea that there's an infinite regress of contingent beings, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting.
Right. If you remember Simos, Trey Jadlow has
Yeah.
in his contingent. I just happened to have the window open earlier of him and Bert Poole going over the
Yes.
contingency argument.
Yeah.
So,
No. Dre Chatterley turned up somewhere recently, didn't he? Was it on
yeah,
Modern Day
debate.
Yeah, right. Same
Yep, I
argument.
found on there. Yep.
Same argument. Like he's never listened to anything anybody said. And like Bert
Yep.
had a way of explaining, Bert Paul this is, had a way of explaining stuff that even I could understand, right? You know, he
Yeah,
was
he
such a
turned
good
my gibberish
explainer.
of mereological nihilism
Yeah,
into like eloquent, perfect wording.
yeah,
Like,
yeah. Absolutely. So, you know, when you have a resource like that and you just ignore it and come back 5 years later and say the same mistakes, then
yeah,
you
Piper.
don't
If you
know.
haven't ever listened to him, I know I told you about his name and the continued, but if you think Darth is bad at and gone on for years, at least Darth has changed up his words a little bit, and his argument and the conclusion are still the same, but
Yeah.
like the words have changed. You listen to Trey Jadlow 7 years ago and listen to my modern day debates like a couple months ago. It's the same guy, same argument.
I've
I think
seen
he just
him
has a
talk
goatee or beard
before.
now.
Yeah, I've seen him talk before. The only thing I really have heard him talk about is like trying to defend like Christianity with like Bayesian like probabilistic epistemology or whatever.
Mm. Yeah, no, he has this script of this contingency argument. I haven't heard it in a while. I'd have to pull it up, but it's it's like the standard. He got it from R.C. Sproul and made it his own, and goes from a necessary being and everything else being contingent on that necessary being. And if you can picture it as an analogy, or picture it just to even, I guess, poetically, I guess to use Fabio's word, is you would have this necessary being that never had, like, there's this always this little gap that never touches its creation or reality or everything that's contingent on it. It's really weird how he will argue it and word it,
Well,
Yeah.
I think it
but
goes
it's
round
but
in
it
like
but it's
cycles as well, Xbox, right? Because, like, you know, you didn't hear about that for a while, and then Ed Fazer comes around with a book, and all of a sudden we're back to Aquinas's five ways, right?
all
And
right,
and
right,
it's like, oh God, we're going round. You know, this is all like been dealt with by like some really serious thinkers,
yeah,
and yet there's a book out, and now all of a
yeah.
sudden
People,
that book seems authority, like an authority. So,
yeah,
but
that's what people wait for people to kind of forget that it's been dealt with, and then spring it back out like it's new.
yeah, absolutely,
People
and
do
I
it with
think
it in philosophy. That actually happens quite a bit.
it really does. It really does, and also on a local scale. Okay, right. So,
Hmm.
again, to go back to dualism, right? That every now and again, well, every now and again, I say that Beltrami's book obviously is the cause of this, right? But people will spout that, all right, or arguments from that, or redesign the arguments from that, as if, right, that this is a genuinely necessary conclusion that dualism must be true,
Hmm.
right? And that just goes round. That comes round every now and again. I hear it, right? I mean, I dealt with it. Well, I say I dealt with it. There were people saying it 3-4 years ago in in on Discord. Now on Clubhouse, I'm sure it's going around. A little while, a year ago, it was going around YouTube again.
Mm, yeah,
Um,
right.
yeah,
No,
dualism.
it just reminded me of and this is it's back a little bit to what we were saying, but it just kicked in my head. Is when I first met Alex Malpass. It I introduced him to Trey Jadlow
You bastard.
instantly. Like I know I was like, he probably hates me for it, but it was the very first like hangout he had ever done, and he ended up in a room with just me and Trey Jadlow, and he Trey Jadlow he tried to get that contingency argument, and
Yep.
Malpass was like, What are you talking about? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
this makes no sense at all."
I mean,
remember him
let's
getting
say
into the
coming.
infinite regress argument about it, and that's where Piper said that.
Yeah.
that she sees it end up like you can't have the infinite regress of the ultimate being or whatever it is. Or I get
Yeah,
why you can only
absolutely.
have one ultimate being, like as the necessary being.
Well,
You
that's
can't
begging the.
you can't have two of them
Sure.
or a pantheon
Well, you
because
could.
then
There's
that.
no reason why you can't. But
Well, yeah, I used to think that, but
well, no, what
there
they're
is a
trying to
reason
do.
why you can't.
Sure, what they're trying to do is smuggle in ultimate as being counting as some kind of singularity.
Right.
When that it's not necessarily the case, though, right?
Yeah,
That's all I'm
no,
saying.
no,
Because
a necessary being, doesn't have to be ultimate. It
well,
just needs
no,
to be
it's
sufficient.
no. Ultimate is just a standard. This is the argument I would give back. Look, ultimate is a standard, right? There's no reason you can't have multiple beings that have the same standard. They don't have to be the
But
same.
yeah, there is. Let me argue it for you. And
Okay,
I
go
know
ahead.
we're way off topic, but let me.
Yeah.
If I used to think that too, and I would argue, like I would try to argue it as well. But then, this is just something recent. Just me remembering Trey Jadlow, and it hit me of why you can't have that. You can't have more than one ultimate being because it makes all the beings equal. One of them has to be ultimate, more than the others. Like, are you following what I'm
No,
saying
I'm
there?
looking for the argument to say why that's necessarily the case.
Because if you have more of ultimate beings, then ultimate is not a good standard. It's not.
Right.
You're stuck with a bunch of equal beings. None of them are more ultimate than the other. You
Exactly.
have to have. You need one that is actually more ultimate than the others.
Yeah, I know, but look, you're either going to be begging the question of what ultimate means, right? You're going to describe
Oh,
ultimate
maybe.
as being
Yeah.
singular, right? And if you describe ultimate as being singular, well, yeah, okay, then it's got to be singular because that's your definition, right? But that doesn't give you any reason to believe that it's true, right? So for
Oh,
me,
yeah. There's
an
no reason
example
for
of
that.
this
Yeah.
is to say, look, 2 and 3 equals 5, right? But so does 4 and 1. Right now, if 5 is the highest number, then you could have two things which are different, which equal the same thing, right?
Right, but swap out the word ultimate with best.
Right. Okay. Well, 3 and 5 is best. It is equal to 1 and 4, right? They're both best. Doesn't matter which one you choose.
No, see, only one of them can be best.
Why?
Not out of
Why?
your math problem, but like
You
out of
just
the
you're
beings.
just you're just going to beg the question that best means singular.
No, that best means better than all the rest.
Right. Okay. And if two things are equal, then they're both best.
And none of them are better than the rest. And for
Well,
the
yeah,
contingency
but
argument to run, one of them has to be better than all the rest.
don't think
And
so.
it makes it have to be a singular one.
No, I think you're just making a tautological
In fact,
argument,
yeah.
which says, look, all of the words which we ascribe to being singular is just like meaning singular. Well, okay, yeah, if you think that it is singular, then yeah, there's only going to be one because that's what singular means.
Yeah, he could do the same thing with just instead ultimate say singular. Yeah.
Right, which is fine. Then you're making the correct argument. I don't think ultimate means singular. I don't think best means singular. There can be many bests,
Yeah.
which all are equal, and they're all the best because there's nothing higher than it.
I don't
Right?
know. Are you following Piper? I'm not going to keep like defending
Yeah.
the argument because I pulled this way off topic. But
Yeah. Okay. No worries. Are
we
you there, Piper? He said he was just. She said, "Beg your pardon, Piper. I don't mean to misgender." Yeah, she said that she was just going to be back in a minute. So
oh
we're
yeah
primary to, I
no
think, be
problem.
back again. Yeah, that was
Yeah, then we can keep
5 minutes ago.
arguing.
Yeah, we can keep arguing. Anyway, look, I'm just saying, look, I don't think it necessarily follows. It implies that for sure, but I think the implication is just in the definition of the word, in which case you're just defining it as, well, you're defining it into singularity rather than it actually being an
Right.
argument for singularity. Yeah.
And I don't know where it could, like, I know, like I said, it comes from R.C. Sproul's work, at least Trey's does, but I've never read Sproul stuff. Like, it's not something that's on my reading list to read. Like,
Yeah. No,
so I don't know, like, why he gets where he gets, but maybe I should read it sometime. Maybe I should put it on my list. Just, it's not that I don't put things that challenge my view on my list, because I spent hours earlier, and actually Piper and Hogtie had to come in and save me.
What, on Clubhouse?
Yeah, and I was explaining my epistemology, and the guy wasn't getting where I was talking about properly basic beliefs. He didn't want to accept my properly basic beliefs were actually properly basic beliefs. He was like, well, maybe you can call them your basic beliefs or your base beliefs or something, but they're not proper basicality and they don't meet the requirement. And that was an argument for like 2 hours.
Yeah.
And it's fine. I like my view challenged, and I hope everybody out there, let people challenge your view. It sharpens you. Things that maybe aren't really working in your view, and you're not realizing it, can be pointed out. You can correct them. You might find views that you didn't even think of that are actually more your view, and you just didn't realize that it's out there. Always have your view challenged. It's just a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you will find alternative views which are probably worth considering, even if it's worth considering, as you say, Xbox, to discount them in your own personal epistemology or worldview.
Right. Yeah, that's why I'm gonna read the dualism stuff. Like, I probably won't become a dualist, but it's worth like looking and challenging and seeing what's going on there, rather than
absolutely
having the singular view and just sticking to it and never looking anywhere else.
Well, I think the good thing about the dualism question in general, for me personally, is that it brings you face to face with the question of a reason to be true, a reason to be false, right? And agnosticism in the middle, and it really brings you face to face with that, right? Because what you think of as a good reason to accept some proposition, right, as true, is very different from what you think you need to accept a proposition to be false, or whether you should be agnostic on the truth or falsity of a proposition. Those three states of belief are very nuanced, if you like, right? Just because something's false doesn't mean it's necessarily true, or just because you think something is false doesn't mean that something else is necessarily true, right? And just because you think something is true doesn't mean something else is necessarily false. And coming face to face with that question all the time seems to me really at the heart of trying to get some kind of, I don't know, clarity about reasoning.
Yeah, clarity is good. And I got two things to say real quick. One is warm. I'm glad you actually shut up. You kind of caught the end of us where we're kind of way off topic, but like I'm glad you shut up. Warm's someone from Clubhouse, and was there earlier as I got beat my head in over the properly basic beliefs for a while, and epistemic solipsism, and we got into another one before that for like an hour, not against A, but just against someone else. But what you were just saying is precepts pull this, where if you can say, well, hey, all these other views don't work, but my view, I'll say Christianity, but so my Christianity worldview is internally consistent and it works. All these other ones don't work, so mine must be true.
Yeah,
That's a false statement.
yeah,
Just
absolutely.
because all the other ones are false, they could all be false, and you could have a internally consistent view, and it could be false just as well as all the other ones as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, just to press on
It
that
didn't
point,
just default to be true, I guess.
yeah, just to press on that, I think that one of the things I said to JG a while back actually was, look, how do you know that your position is true? And he didn't want to go down that particular fallacy, which is the impossibility of the contrary. So he decided to go down, I know it's true because of revelation, right? Personal revelation. But the problem with that is to say, well, that may be good enough for you to accept the truth of the conclusion, but it can't be necessarily good for me to accept the truth of that conclusion because I don't have access to your revelation,
Right.
right? And if I don't have access to it, it can never be an argument that I'm going to accept as true, right? So necessarily, presuppositionalism can't be an apologetic. It can't be a reason to believe for anybody else that it's true if you rely on the answer that revelation it comes through revelation, right? So just to point that out, it's one of the things that I've said, like I said it to a few people actually, and there was one like comeback which was no, it was okay. That can't happen. Oh, Angelo's a sneaky fuck. I don't know what you're talking about, but oh, hang on, it was this one. Okay, right. You're just trolling me. Okay. That's okay. That's okay.
Someone asked me about Clubhouse. So Clubhouse is a phone app. You can use it on Android or iPhone. But I mean, if you want to use it on the PC, download an app called Club Deck, and
Could you just
it still asks for your phone number, but you can get a Google number or you can use your own number. It's not really like someone can't track you like an IP address.
okay,
So.
could you grab me the link for that and I'll put it in description
Oh yeah, I can grab
for
the
the
Club Deck
PC
one.
one. Yeah. Do I need to bring my own club? He says. Yeah.
Yeah, bring
Anyway,
one.
welcome back, Piper. Are you there?
Yep.
Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to round things up now. So I'd like you to, if you wouldn't mind, maybe state your position on the theory of mind, and then I'll probably read a bit of poetry for the outro.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, so, I'm probably I would subscribe to a variety of physicalism or materialism about the mind. I think it's like a material object. Particularly, I think it's to be identified with certain processes that go on in the body. Um, I also think that um, our conception of the sort of physical world and the things going on in the body is not something, that we know sort of directly or indirectly, in the sense that we know directly or indirectly the mind independent world. Rather, we sort of know those things because we can construct a mental picture of those things based on our experience of them as human beings. And so that's where I'd probably differ with, a lot of the standard um, materialist or physicalist accounts. I'm also not a reductionist about the mind. Some materialist or physicalist accounts about the mind have been reductionist, saying that the mind is sort of reducible to the basic sort of physical processes going on in the world. I don't think that's the case. I think you have to understand the mind as a sort of higher order phenomena going on in animals, even if I think it's the case that you don't need anything other than, you know, um, those biological processes to understand the mind. And so basically, the way I'd sort of put it is like, you know, there are certain physical processes that can only be understood in mental terms, and they're all mental processes can only be properly understood in physical terms, right? Um, and that's sort of my position on the whole, uh, what the mind is thing. I typically, you know, also for some other, loose issues, there's the issue I think you raised about, how should we define mentality, right? Can we give a set of necessary and sufficient conditions for, mentality for the mind? I actually don't think you can. I think since the mind is, a sort of at least necessary condition for the mind is experience. It's an experiential thing, and so I think, like, you know, your sort of knowledge of what the mind is comes from having a mind, from having experiential states. And so, if you have to be sort of told what the mind is, you won't be able to get the concept, right? So, I would tend to think that. I would also tend to agree with Bertano and Herschel that intentionality is the mark of the mental. So anything that possesses intentionality, and intentionality here is defined as aboutness. So the fact that my thoughts are, if I'm thinking about the Eiffel Tower, my thought is about the Eiffel Tower. I think that if that's present, then a mind is present, right? That minds are the kinds of things that have intentionality. And I could sort of go into more about my views about intentionality, but I won't, babble on about it too long.
Okie
So
doke.
yeah, those are my basic sort of positions on the issue.
Okay, thank you for that. We were just wrapping up, actually, Hillary's. But if
Okay.
you'd like to say something briefly, I would be more than happy to hear what you have to say.
No, I'm happy just to listen.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for coming in. I'm sorry it's late. I think you would have been had a few things to say on this topic. Okay, so that's basically theory of mind. It's a tricky subject. Like you're saying there, Piper, and therefore it really comes down to what would you say what is it, ontology and epistemology, or would you say it was one or the other, Piper?
Well, I think it's both.
Mhm.
Okay, excellent. So I'm glad we were able to clear everything up. And so as a result, I will just leave you with something like, I guess, this, if you wouldn't mind. So, lovers walking along a shore and leave their footprints in the sand. Is the sound of distant drumming just the fingers of your hand? Pictures hanging in a hallway and the fragment of a song, half remembered names and faces, but to whom do they belong? When you knew it was over, you were suddenly aware that the autumn leaves were turning to the colour of her hair, like a circle in a spiral, like a wheel within a wheel, never ending or beginning, or an ever spinning reel, as the images unwind like the circles that you find in the windmills of your mind. Thank you, everybody. That's it. I'd like to thank everybody that's been here. Fabio, Fabio, Hog Tie, of course, Headless Chicken, Hillary's emails, Xbox, of course, a fantastic host. Thank you, Piper, for guiding us through
Absolutely.
what is probably the hardest topic on the face of the planet. And
Yes, thank you so much,
everybody,
Piper.
yeah, thank you. And to everybody inside chat, of course. And so, as usual, we will play you out with our brand. Why not? There it is. So thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week for another show.